countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey! Welcome back to another week of the Last Comic Shop Podcast!
That's right, we are opening the shop to newbies, and we're going to search through some never-ending rows of long boxes to bring you some reviews and recommendations.
Yeah, we're keeping the lights on for the oldies and the moldies and the people that are also confused as to why Nicole is here, but Andy is not here. Although, not that I'm complaining, Nicole's much easier on the eyes, much easier on the personality, much easier in general. But what's going on?
Yeah, I don't know what type of body wash you buy that husband of yours, but I'd much rather be around someone that smells of lavender and rose petals than dishwash and stale Cheetos.
Well, thanks, guys. I am the hostess with the mostest, Nicole Larson, filling in while Andrew is off traveling on business. I'm joined by the shop's always loyal co-hosts, Chad Smith and J.A. Scott, for another week of talking about comic books. I do have a confession, guys. I wasn't able to read the comic book this week.
Heavens to Megatron!
Oh, my stars and garters.
Yeah, Andy told me we were going to read the 1981 run of Doctor Strange by Roger Stern and Frank Miller, and I looked everywhere for these comics. Comic shops, libraries, Andrew's shelves, the dark web, and all I could find was some in-house ads and a cover by Frank in Doctor Strange number 46, and...
Your husband's a dick.
What?
That never actually happened. They advertised it, and it was not a thing.
Yeah, it was solicited back in February of 81, but then Frank ended up working on other books, and it never happened.
You gotta be kidding me.
No, that's what Andrew likes to do. When I first came on the shop, he sent me that book and said I should go find it and read it too. It's his form of hazing.
You know, or just being a dick.
I can't believe this. Here I was telling him I wanted us to read Pride of Baghdad by Brian K. Vaughan, but no. He was all like, oh, you'll love this Doctor Strange run. It's got Frank Miller art, and honey, you'll finish it so fast because it's like...
Just like reading nothing. Yeah, that's the same thing he told me.
Yeah, if it's any consolation, though, I would have read that Pride of Baghdad. That looks real good. With all the lions, and we could hear them roar. Oh.
In any case, that means my soon-to-be sleeping on the couch for the next month husband left us with no comic book to read for this week. So I guess we should go down to the archives and see if we can dig up a past show for all those that tuned in to listen.
Yeah, well, why should they suffer? I mean, it's not like they married the schlub.
You're gonna hear us roar. Oh. Oh. I forget how the rest of it goes. Something, roar.
Yeah, so, since you are the host, Nicole, do you have any past shows in mind that we can run for our loyal fan base?
So, the last time I was on the show, we did Atomic Blonde with Charlize Theron. It kind of made me think about that one time we reviewed Old Guard by Greg Rukka and the Netflix movie. That was pretty good. Plus, Old Guard 2 finally popped up on Netflix this past week, so some fans might want to revisit the first movie again before watching the new one.
There you go. What's 5 years between friends?
Yeah, and I wasn't on the show, so that's even less work for me to do. I heartily agree. So here's Andy, Chad, Nicole, and Ethan Larson talking about a whole slew of kick-ass immortal warriors. None of which, I will point out, are Connor McLeod.
Because there could only be one.
Each week we get together and sometimes we have movies about comic books and we want to talk about the comic book, but it's a lot like the movie, and so we're going to talk about the movie and the comic book, and it's the same thing.
Anyways, I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson, and of course I'm joined by my co-host Chad Smith, as well as my brother Ethan Larson, who has joined us for... Is this the first time you've reviewed a movie with us, a comic book related movie on the podcast?
Yes, because I have not seen a movie in the theater since 2016.
Which one was it?
Welcome to Paris.
Cinderella.
I don't even remember that
Without
one.
My Daughter. Yeah, it was the remake. It was actually 2015 because it was right around the time she was born. We got to sneak out. And then lo and behold, there was a 3-year-old girl, cute as she could be, but just yelling at the screen and singing along with the songs. And we said afterwards, like, we went up to the parent, we said, oh, your daughter is really cute and stuff. And she's like, yeah, I hope she wasn't too loud. And we were like, no, it's okay. We got a little one at home, so it's okay.
It's like, we'll get you one day.
We also got my wonderful wife, Nicole Larson, on today's program. Do you remember the last movie review show you were on?
No.
No, you don't.
I don't remember.
I'm trying to
which
remember.
one it would have been.
I think.
Joker. Would have been
I was going to say, was it?
Yeah, she was on the Joker. Yeah, because you actually really wanted to see that movie.
Yes.
And you gave it a good grade.
Let's not get Chad started again.
The critics agree with you, Nicole. The critics agree with you.
Yeah, well, it's because of Chad's review, actually, that I still have yet to see that movie. Any interest that I had in it was just vaporized when it was child molester for 15 minutes.
I know, right? The comic book that we're going to talk about today is called The Old Guard, which is, again, taking Netflix by storm. Right, Ethan?
Yeah, that's correct. It's, currently, as we're recording, it's trending #1 in America.
That's right.
Let's hope that when this episode actually airs, it'll still be trending.
Listen, I like to let things simmer. You know that if we released it the week after it was trending #1, everybody was going to be talking about Old Guard. I like to get that out of the way, let people die down a little bit, and then remind them, hey, it's out there.
Everybody can talk about a movie when it first comes out.
It takes real men and women to talk about it when it came out 4 weeks ago.
That's right. To remind you what you might have missed.
I set trends. This is the way things should be, especially when it's Netflix. I can understand if it's in the theater. Most movies in theaters don't last for 4 weeks. Like you don't see them in the first 2 weeks. Like you're never going to see them. Netflix, heck, I'm sure you could name like at least one really hot show that was on Netflix that you're like, yeah, I have yet to get around to watching that.
Yeah, I mean, well, Extraction is a movie that I haven't seen yet that I really want to.
Yeah.
And then The Floor is Lava. We've only watched 1 or 2 episodes.
Anyways, we're reviewing Old Guard, and that's available on Netflix with Charlize Theron. Did I pronounce that correct?
I don't think so.
The fans, this is what they expect from me. I'm going to get a bunch of comments saying, like, I butchered this person's name and whatever.
I think
Anyways.
it's Charlize, isn't it?
Charlize, that's what I said.
No, you did not.
I did. I said Charlize Theron.
Yeah.
Anyways, again, on today's program, unlike other shows that we've done, we're going to be reviewing the comic book and the movie at kind of like the same time and kind of comparing and contrasting their differences. I actually did this out of order. I watched the movie first, and then I went back and read the trade, which is, again, Nicole got really after me because she was just like, what do you mean there was a comic book first? And then she got all bitter.
You didn't tell me.
Curious.
He's like, are you going to watch this and be on this show? And I'm like, I guess you can turn it on. And I didn't know that there was a comic with it.
So traditionally, Nicole, when you know something has a movie related to it, or if you know there's a book, which do you go for first?
The book is always better.
There you go.
So my rationale for not watching the movie first is that when you read the book and you have the characters forming in your mind, I just think there's so much more openness there. And like, for example, and this is really old, and I know, it's not known to be the best literature out there, but the Twilight series, right? Robert Pattinson is not my idea of Edward, okay? So I actually refused to watch any of those movies until I had finished reading the whole series, because the Edward in my mind was much better looking and much more charismatic than he was.
Hashtag not my Edward.
Yeah, not my Edward.
Didn't you say that the same thing about that other one? The sex book that all the ladies were all about several years ago.
Oh yeah, 50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades.
Yeah.
That makes sense because that was just a fanfic of Twilight, just racier.
I'm sure Ethan feels the same way about Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
having read the book.
like certain people, like Jon Snow, you can't really get Jon Snow's image out of your head. And plus there was 6,000 characters in Game of Thrones. I can't imagine all those characters.
I will admit that sometimes, if there are a ton of characters, it's harder to do on your own. And
For me too, whenever the names are super difficult, it really helps to have a visual. But otherwise, and this will make me sound crazy pants, I prefer the voices in my head. So I try to read whatever it is first. Otherwise, if I see that actor, if I see Daniel Radcliffe, that's what Harry Potter's going to sound like. Sometimes it happens retroactively, like Iron Man sounds like Robert Downey Jr. now.
I'm going to say that comic book related movies are the only real properties that have two different versions of those characters, or I let myself enjoy a story in one medium or the other. For example, Game of Thrones, never read any of the books. Why? Because I started with the TV shows and I said, no, this is the way I'm going to experience this particular piece of fiction through the TV shows. I'm not going to go back and have something else I'm going to compare it to. So comic book related movies is actually the only time when I'm like, yeah, I've read comic books with these characters before, and now I'm doing, whatever movie adaptation of that. Chad, real quickly, who did the comic book?
So the comic book was written by Greg Rukka, who's done a ton of stuff in the comic book world. The art is done by Leandro Fernandez, colors by Daniel Miwa, letters by Jody Wynn. We read the first volume, which was collected around 2017. The second volume I know just wrapped up. They had another 5-issue run.
I was surprised, and rightfully so, about the fact that this particular movie actually only encompasses the first trade. And I'm guessing now that's the reason why maybe they made trade number 2, to give R&D for maybe the sequel if this was successful on Netflix. Didn't they do the same thing with kind of Umbrella Academy?
Well, there's a huge plot point in the movie that's completely omitted from this book.
Right.
Which is, we'll get into that.
We'll get to that in just a second. But,
so I don't know if that actually is a relevant part of the second trade. That's what I was wondering that the whole time I was watching the movie, if that actually does become relevant, and that's where they pulled it from.
Did you read the comic first then and then watch the show?
I actually went back to back, baby.
But you read first and then
read
watched.
the book and then immediately after watched the movie.
Because, like you said, there are some major differences, which obviously we'll get into, but having been tricked into watching it first and then reading, I was waiting. I'm like, where is this going to be in this book? And then it never happened.
All right, so let's, real quickly, we got all the details about the comic book. Let's get all the details from Ethan about the movie, and then we'll get that 10-cent synopsis and get into our thoughts. So, Ethan, who's in the movie?
Obviously, the big actress in it is Charlize Theron. Obviously, she's very well known, has won an Oscar, has also been in similar movies like Aeon Flux, what's that other one? Atomic Bombshell. And then the rest of them are just kind of a hodgepodge of character actors, I would say.
Copley was somebody.
Yeah, Copley was the voice of Scar, and he was also, for comic book fans, he was
Mordo from Doctor Strange.
Strange. Yeah, don't forget about the bad guy. About Harry Potter stuff.
Yes, Dudley from...
Dudley grown up and turned skinny and wimpy.
Yeah, works for Big Pharma.
Yeah, Nicole's got a lot to say about the differences between the main evil guy in the comic book versus the movie. So, Nicole, can you give us that 10-cent synopsis of what happens? Because it's pretty much the same story. There's a couple differences, but it's pretty much the same story.
Yeah. So the main character, her name is Andy. Turns out she's like 6,000 years old because these people can die, but essentially are immortal. They can be significantly wounded, aka shot in the face, etc., and revive and heal from that. So she leads a small band, actually, if you consider the time frame here, a band of 4 similar, people, and they kind of do missions throughout the world. Long story short, this big pharma guy wants to essentially capture them to study them, so we have that going on. And meanwhile, a new, I don't know if we're calling them immortals, they don't really have a name, but finds out that she's immortal. So they have a new one of them to add to their group, and her name is Nyla. And so they have to simultaneously be like dealing with this pharma guy trying to capture them, meanwhile trying to incorporate this new, youngling into the group.
Absolutely.
Not only trying to incorporate her, she comes to the rescue.
Yeah, she does.
Well,
by the end of
she incorporates herself.
By the end, she's pretty badass, and rightfully so, because spoiler alert, one of these immortals turns on the group, which was, I'm not going to say it was telegraphed, but it kind of seemed like it was at times. Like, I was like, okay, which one's going to turn? And I knew it wasn't going to be the couple because they had their own dichotomy going on. What was that?
So
Joseph.
we have Andy, who's the oldest. She's like 6,000 something years old, and then there's a couple. Their names are Joe and Nikki, and they have actually more ancient names. They're from like the Crusades,
yeah.
And they are together, which I'm going to bring it up later, but that's a significant difference between them and how they deal with their eternity versus, Andy and or Booker. Booker is actually the youngest until Nyla comes around. Booker's only from about like 200 years old. I think he was like
Napoleonic Wars when they. And you find out that there are other immortals that have existed previously. There's one that kind of, I forget what his name is, but he's the one that proves this thing that they can die eventually. Like there just will come a point they just won't heal. And so they say that's their time. There's also one that I don't know if it was in the comic book as much, but they paid a lot of attention to it on the movie.
This is what we're talking about. She's not in the comic at all.
Oh,
I think she's there.
Yeah,
there's like a one-page thing where they show her getting thrown off the boat.
Yeah, and I think she's at the beginning. Isn't she at the beginning? Isn't she hanging out with, like, when they show the scenes of the one guy who dies? Like, isn't she with Andy as she? There's somebody else with her. With Andy.
She has her love.
In a weird, morbid way, it was nice to see that this, and we'll get into it more when we talk about the movie, but that this person got thrown overboard in an iron casket and then drowned over and over again. Because I was like, how the hell do you stop these people? And I was like, okay, if you just throw them at the bottom of the ocean, that should probably work pretty well. Or else, like, if you ran out of land to go, like, I guess you could just go and explore the ocean. If you're bored enough in one of these immortals, you can't die, so you might as well just...
That's right. But it's also the important thing that they're immortal, but they feel like pain, like everything hurts, so you would just keep drowning, and like that is not a pleasant feeling.
That's one of my greatest fears.
I would not want to walk around the ocean even if I was going to survive, because I'm going to drown every 3 seconds, and that's awful.
I was thinking about that though, about how you could kill these people, and the one thing that they didn't try in neither the comic book or the movie would be like, what about like literally decapitating and like not having the head anywhere near the body, because we see them recover from like major gunshot wounds to the head where like their brains are like splattered all over the place and everything kind of like back to place.
If they did decapitation, that would be the Highlander, and that's
exactly what I was
from
thinking.
that they did. Greg Rukka would have been sued. Like he would have been like,
but even on a smaller scale, what Nicole's talking about, nobody really removed a limb to see if the limb would grow back.
Fought through all these like wars and stuff throughout time that like drawing and quartering would have been a punishment, guillotine would have been a punishment. Like there should have been things where limbs and body parts removed.
I was going to say with the when Big Pharma gets him, he starts taking out organs. Like if you looked and you saw the jars, were like there's little tiny bits in there that I assumed were.
Yeah, they were just little bits though.
Just little tiny bits. All right, well, let's get into initial thoughts so that we can get our grade. And again, it's going to be a double grade. Like, again, you're going to give, at the end of this thing, you're going to give a grade for the movie, you're going to give a grade for the comic book. We're going to decide which is better. Well, should people do both? Should they read the comic book? Should they watch the movie? What should they do? And I think we're going to start off with my good friend Chad, his initial thoughts of both properties.
Okay, so starting with the comic. I thought the comic book read quickly. And I did that one first, admittedly. The art, it was a nice mix between 1990s Joe Quesada and Mike Mignola with a little bit of the whole Gabriel Ba, Fabio Moon style. But the characters were distinct. I love the coloring in here. All that stuff was solid. It was a well-crafted book. And for me, one of the things that gets me, and it's about both the comic and the movie, is that I think it's deeper than it actually is. With some of these themes of immortality, and it kind of reminded me of like when the Harry Potter craze hit, and everybody was all like, "Oh, Harry Potter is wonderful." I'm like, "Yeah, this is cool if you've never read the X-Men." when they throw that lady off the boat and she's strapped in the steel coffin, I'm like, "Oh, that was neat." When they did it to Wolverine, and they filled him up with adamantium, and he just keeps coming back and dying and all that. So like, I thought the comic was decent. I actually enjoyed the movie more.
Okay.
So I took notes. I've got a couple of positives. First, I thought the action scenes in here were really well done. I watched it over the course of 3 different settings. I watched a half an hour, and then my wife came down and wanted to watch The West Wing. So then I stopped and watched another half an hour later on. And, like, it was shot for shot, like, a lot from the comic book to the point where I was like, wow, I just read this. This is boring. And then halfway through, they get to that big twist that they do that's different, where they finally give the characters some stakes. You know, instead of people being all immortal and they can run and shoot whoever and all that stuff, they finally gave it some stakes. I thought it picked up in the second half. The other things that I thought the movie did really well was also this movie was like a step forward for representation in that it was directed by a black female director. It had a female as the main starring lead, strong female lead. It had a gay romance. And also the Dudley from Harry Potter's getting work. And so all those things I thought were good in terms of like, it's one of those things that society needs, that we can have that type of representation. So it becomes more normalized. Like I was a big fan. I'm not trying to be facetious about it.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited that we can have black female directors making so-so movies, because that's what this was. It was a so-so movie.
Right.
It dragged on way too long. I thought it was kind of mundane. Like I said, I was familiar with some of the themes, and so I was like, yeah, okay. But yeah, so there were some positives there. But at the end of the day, I thought, like, yeah, it's okay.
All right, let's go to Nicole next, because she took a lot of notes.
I did take a lot of notes.
All right.
I think in the end, my sentiment's going to be quite similar to Chad. Now, I did watch the movie first, so I will say I didn't have like the boredom factor from having like just read the comic book, and actually probably it worked in reverse. Like as I was reading the comic book, I was like, okay, and I was waiting for what I enjoyed in the movie to come into the comic book, and like we said, it might have been there, but I might have missed it, but it certainly wasn't as prevalent. But that being said, one of the first things I said to Andrew after watching it was like that the plot overall was fairly weak, and I know when I was logging the comic and my little tracker of books that I've read and stuff, the comments on there were, oh, here you go, another thing about immortals. It's kind of been done, I guess, and the whole pharma coming after them, like it was just very weak and not very complex, kind of like, oh, there's the Weasley guy that runs the pharma and he's gonna go hide and he's a jerk, and it just wasn't very interesting. But to Chad's point, what I liked about it was representation. I didn't know, about the black director, to be honest. I tend not to know about those things or pay attention. But when I was specifically comparing them, one of the things that I really liked in how they represented Andy in the movie compared to the comic is that they didn't bring in this like sex stuff. So one of the first scenes in the comic is like her getting out of some random dude's bed and, don't even tell me your name type of thing. And I just feel like, why is it always about that with women? And I get that they're showing that like she can't really form long-lasting connections because she's been around for 6 million or 1,000 years, and she's not going to see these people and they're all going to die. But at the same point, I felt like her character was so strong, and like they didn't show that part in the movie because they didn't need to, because she had enough on her own. Mm-hmm. So I like that they left that out. And then the other thing kind of going hand in hand is in the comic, there's, she does have a love in her life. She meets this Achilles guy, and, obviously she doesn't age and he does, and eventually they have to say goodbye. But I actually like that in the movie they focused more on her sisterhood with Quinn, is her name.
Yeah, the girl that gets thrown overboard.
The one that we keep referring to that gets thrown over. I thought that they really represented that bond very well in the movie. I think it was more than apparent that their relationship was deep, and literally is a sisterhood. And whether I don't know, they really didn't show if they had any romantic side of it, but that's kind of not it's a moot point.
Yeah.
But I like that they focused on that sisterhood rather than it being a romantic relationship.
Okay. So
I have a bunch of other notes, but I'm going to let other people.
All right. Ethan, you go.
Well, let's call a spade a spade. The comic book was written by a man, and Andy was basically a man in women's clothing. Like, there wasn't anything really feminine about it. I think that the movie did her a little bit too heavy-handed in the Mother Teresa stuff. I like the fact that they gave her some softness as to, some of the stuff that she's doing is trying to benefit humanity, but I think it went a tiny bit overboard in that regard. I see that Netflix is trying to set up a TV show for these people or some kind of sequel already.
Yeah.
Those wheels are already turning, and they could easily just subtract their main star and just focus on all these ancillary characters that aren't really doing very much or aren't very famous to carry along the TV show. I find it very interesting, going back to the comic book, that Chad would like the coloring in particular, because the coloring reminded me a lot of the Blueberry coloring. Block colors, and people were purple for no apparent reason. I got that sense a lot. It read a lot like a Punisher book, and then I was actually surprised that the artist did Punisher Max, or at least a stint on it. Again, I think it got to the point in the comic book that these people were so badass that it was like they almost became... Villain is a strong word, but not necessarily heroes whatsoever. I think that they became almost like a horror movie monster by the end. I mean, you weren't supposed to feel bad for the Merrick guy, but they're all five of them are standing over him like into the badass pose, which you could easily turn if you were thinking about it into holy shit, this is the scariest thing that could possibly happen to somebody. 5 people that can't be killed coming after you. So I think that there was a couple vibes of that. And I think Chad pointed out too, because I read the book first and watched the movie right afterwards. I was back to back, and it was basically shot for shot. I do have to say a special shout out to the gay love speech between the two men. That was beautiful. And I love the fact that they did it word for word almost in the movie, because that was a moment I was really waiting for actually in the movie, because that was really powerful. I think it's probably the most powerful thing in the book, and certainly the most memorable for me.
All right, well, I'm going to just kind of jump in here, and again, there's some general sentiments that I'm going to kind of mirror in some ways. I watched the movie first. I did not read the comic book first. The movie, for me, I will say this: for both, I felt like there were parts of this that were a retread. I've watched The Highlander. I've read The Eternal Warrior. I've read Wolverine comics. I've read things about Immortals. And I kept on saying to myself, yeah, this reminds me a lot of Bloodshot when I was watching the movie, except for things that didn't. And I will specifically say the things that really stuck out was the fact that they had a strong female lead. They played up her relationship with Gwen, which I thought was incredibly well done. But the best thing about this entire was the relationship between Joe and Nikki. That was really the heart of this particular program. Their representation of their relationship is extremely life-affirming. And again, it filled me with a lot of hope that these two originally, in both the movie and the comic book, started off trying to kill each other. They met in the Crusades and trying to kill each other, and by the end, they are each other's everything. Yeah. They are.
Isn't that how love goes?
Yeah, it does. And,
it does.
And, that's that they say it all the time. The antithesis of love is indifference. It's not hate. So those are really powerful emotions. So ultimately, at the end of the day, from the speech that was word for word, both in the comic book and the movie, just this notion that you could find somebody and we've seen it all the time with I hate to say it, but a man and a woman that are mortal and they meet each other and but it was really nice to see
that can be anyone with anyone.
Anybody with anybody, and especially in this day and age, a same-sex couple get that particular kind of respectful representation on screen,
and without it being showy about them being they're gay.
Exactly.
It was just no, these are just two people. Can I jump in and because I'm gonna piggyback on that. So I think for me the difference between Nikki and Joe living quote unquote eternally, and then you have Andy and Booker, right, who clearly struggle more. The fact that Nikki and Joe have each other, I think, is what makes immortality tolerable for them, right? Whereas
Right.
Andy is like, I mean, you hear it, it's like the first line in the movie and it's the first, page in the comic is like, I'm so tired of this. And you can see it in her. And I thought Charlize Theron did a good job of portraying that, throughout the movie, that like she literally is just like f***ing over this. And then Booker, who had to go through, trying to stay connected to his family, watching them all get older and die and having them essentially turn on him. I think those two face eternity with such a different outlook than Nikki and Joe, who literally will die over and over again just to have one more day with each other.
Well, I think Booker is a little young in this whole scenario.
Yeah, he is.
So he still has those feelings. Like, he can still probably remember his son's face 100 years later and watching him die. Like, the other three don't have any real concept of that anymore. Even Andy goes into a long description of that, of not being able to remember her mother's face, her sister's face, because it was just so long ago. I'm sure Joe and Nikki probably have the same sentiments. I think it helps that they have each other and that they can always see each other, but at the same time, like, they probably don't have any connection to their old world either.
I'm just saying, I don't think they have the same like desperate loneliness.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Go
how
ahead, Jeff.
lucky can you get if there are 5 people in the world that live forever and you fall in love with one of them? Like,
that is true. Like, what are the chances that you actually like these other 5 people?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting to me, and I don't know any of these other stories that y'all are talking about, but certainly, the thought of immortality is not new in, fiction. But I did think it was interesting that, over millennia, you're talking about 5, 6, 7 people that they know of. Granted, when you count some of the other characters that did pass away, or that Gwen. But, of course, the scientist in me is like, well, how did this happen? Because it's clearly not hereditary. It's not like they're being birthed.
I think that the biggest wrinkle about all of this that I really enjoyed was the fact that they brought in this dreaming aspect where they could, they knew about the other immortals when they came onto the scene. Like, I thought that part of all of the immortality stuff that I've seen before, even in both the comic book and the movie, I thought that was the most interesting wrinkle that kind of brought this in. I was like, and I kind of like, especially in the comic book, how they talked about how, like, back in the early days, it took forever for Andy to find the rest of them because it took them so long to get from one part of the world to the other, versus now they found Nyla in like a day.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, why would they not know that they're immortal until they're adults? Like, why is Nyla 27 and, like, that's the first time that she, I mean, I guess that's the first time she got, like, her carotid open, but, like, still you'd think how bones heal. Like, you'd think if she had broken a bone as a kid, like, she would know. It just,
you would notice. Like, you don't become a Marine without ever getting a bruise.
Yeah.
But isn't it that you have to die? Maybe it's because you have to die first. Like, that was one thing that I thought, like, maybe it jump starts from the first moment you die until then, like, everything's cool. Then you die, and then you're like, yeah, now my body knows what to do.
All right, we have to take a commercial break to pay our non-existent bills. Enjoy these moments of commercial levity, and we'll be right back with more of The Last Comic Shop.
Hey fellas, looking to save money on your collectible supplies? Whether it's comics, cards, sports memorabilia, or miscellaneous pop culture goodies, make sure to use promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off your orders at bcwsupplies.com. Not only does it get you a discount on BCW's already low prices, but using LCS Pod at checkout is an amazing way to show support to the Last Comic Shop podcast, the most incredible comic book podcast on the airwaves. So if you are in need of collectible supplies, head out to bcwsupplies.com and use promo code LCSPOD today. That's promo code LCSPOD.
In a world where there's often 60 plus years of history to worry about, how can you quickly get into a new comic character or franchise? If you're like me, then you turn to video games. But how well does that work out? In some cases, pretty well. In others, it's a giant disaster. But how can you know which games will set you on the right path and which games will just leave you more confused than you were before? Play Comics is the show for you. I'm Chris, and each episode we take a look at video games based on comic properties and how well they stick to that source material. So listen in and get the scoop on which games are worth your time over at playcomics.com or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
But real quickly, I had 3 things I wanted to finish off before we got grades, and I think it's going to be what I consider the 3 biggest differences between the book and the movie. And so I'm going to go around. We're going to go round robin style.
3 big differences. We might have other differences.
I think these are the big 3 differences. Number 1, I'm going to leave the big one for last because I think we all know what the big difference is between the book and the movie. Number 1 is the fact that the Merrick guy in the books is like this weightlifting son of a gun that's like massive, and I actually didn't get a reason why he wanted the immortality other than like he's just like, yeah, I just want to be big and beefy and in the comic, versus like Weasley dude that's like, man, I want to get more monies and stuff, like your typical bad guy. Any thoughts on like one interpretation of the bad guy more than the other?
I like the comic book version much more than the Weasley guy. I think that he fit the story, I think, a little bit better, to be honest. Like his motivation seemed oddly more real, because once you get to the point where you have billions and billions of dollars, the only thing in the world that can stop you is literally death, because you can buy everything. A motivation to say, I want to live forever because I want to amass as much money as I possibly humanly can.
Or have time to spend it.
Yeah. I think was a greater motivation than, I want to do this and get drugs and blah, blah, blah.
All right, Chad.
I was going to say, I think the movie, especially once we got into the second half where they started to go a little bit more on their own, it tended to lean into cliches a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Where like the Weasley bad guy feels like more the cliche. And so for that, I would go with the comic version, but at the same time, as it leaned into those cliches, like sometimes that's not the worst choice. I didn't mind it.
I will say, so, I mean, we kind of already talked about the Weasley versus the buff guy, but going into actually Copley, whatever his name was, who's the guy that kind of sets all this up and helps get them trapped. I did like how in the movie they gave him a backstory that, was semi-altruistic, right? Like he lost his wife to ALS and he just desperately seemingly wants to actually help the world, and then he realizes his error with kind of teaming up with this Merrick guy, and then ends up teaming up with our old guard group. But I did like that they added that. I felt like he was kind of empty in the comic book, like they didn't really give a good reason why he was really involved in all of this type of stuff.
He was a one-note character with zero motivation.
I think so. I like that they added that detail, and then kind of along the same lines, I think the movie did a little bit better job of showing Booker and like again where his mentality was of like he was trying to do this for good and just ended up doing it with the wrong people. I mean, that's he really was haunted by this, his son dying, and I think he thought he could, quote unquote bring him back or or whatnot. But I like that those points were more emphasized in the movie than they really were in the comic.
Okay.
I'll say with the Copley thing, I felt like that was another cliche, but it worked. It did work better than the comic.
I was going to say, so the number 2 difference that I saw is I thought Nyla in the movie actually had a stronger arc than the comic book. They spent more time with Nyla, and like by the end, like she was really, even in some ways more than Andy, the protagonist. I mean, she was always supposed to be the audience surrogate. That's her role in both the comic book and the movies, being like, hey, I'm new person on the block, teach me the ropes. Mm-hmm. I'm rookie immortal, let's go. And filling in the backstory for us as the audience. But at the same time, I think she had a better arc. I think in the comic book, I think she just got blended in.
I was going to say, if we didn't talk more about Nyla, that was going to be a major problem, because having read the book second again, she was totally underplayed. And I'm just going to say one comment about the art, which the art was okay, but there was one scene in particular with her, and she's in the comic drawn with short hair, but like there's this full like face front picture of her, and like it's just not really flattering. Yeah. I mean, it makes her look like an animal. And like, that's kind of, with all the racial tension and thing, it just really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But I thought that Nyla in the movie was totally kick-ass, and I really liked her character. And again, the fact that she didn't just bow down. I mean, she stood up for herself, and then in the end, came back and really saved the day.
I did like her whiz-bang attitude, though, in the book. I kind of missed that from the movie, where she had that great saying of, like, I don't want to waste a day, or a day wasted is a day never spent, or something that her grandmother said to her. And then that Andy actually adopts that as, like, her motto moving forward. And you could see a little bit of growth of Andy through Nyla, which you didn't get at all in the movie. I feel like there was some type of bond that was being formed, but it was so underneath the surface. Like, you'd have to be exposed in layers, like in probably the sequel, or somehow expanded upon. They focus much more on Andy's relationship with Quinn in the short period of time that they do than I think that they do at all with Andy and Niall during the movie.
All right, Chad?
I was just going to say, too, and I think the actress, Kiki Lane, did a great job in the role, but, like, there are certain parts of this where it started to be a little bit like torture porn, and it seemed like she got the worst of it. She's always getting shot in the head. She's getting shot over here. She's getting thrown out of these places. With the way things are right now, to take your black lead character and beat the shit out of her like they do, like, I'm like, I don't know if I would make that choice.
Well, Nikki, one of the two, Nikki or Joe, and I forget which one it was, did get, a gun put in his mouth and his whole head blown up. I mean,
they do torture the gays too.
Wow. All right.
Before, don't move on. I had a couple more things about Nyla. So
okay.
The other thing in the movie, I did like that when she first kind of found out that she was immortal and Andy comes to save her. I thought it added to it that, there was this underlying thing of that the army was going to ship her off to Germany for more testing. I mean, it kind of added a little bit of like, oh shit, like government interference type of thing. Mm-hmm. But more so, I was going to say that I liked how she was introduced to the group in the movie better than I did in the book. In the book, remember, they come in and Nikki and Joe have already been taken and it's just Booker. So she doesn't really have any idea who these two people are that they're going to save. Whereas I think the movie, it makes more sense that like she kind of meets them, kind of bonds with them, gets some time with them before that all happens, and then she's there when they're abducted. I thought that was just a better scene.
Yeah, I was going to go along lines of also I like the fact that they actually gave her a backstory, like her dad was a Marine and like she lost her dad in the movie versus the comic book where I don't think they even talk about where she comes from. She
just talk about a picture with her brother.
Yeah, so she just like shows up one day and she's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to hang out with this Andy person in the comic book. She's like, all right, I'm an immortal now. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just going to say the stakes of the movie of her becoming an immortal and losing her family, I think, is much more pronounced and I think more gut-wrenching than it is in the book. She's like, okay, I'll just leave my family. It's fine. Just be an immortal now. That's what I do.
Let's roll.
No, but the fact that she had the balls to stand up to Andy and say, like, no, like, I'm going to go live with my, family. And, yeah, they're going to have questions, but I have some time left. And then, obviously she does come back and saves them. But, yeah, it added a lot more depth than what I really got out of the comic book.
All right, so let's get to the big one. Big guns here, folks. If you wanted to know the big spoiler between the comic book and the movie, go ahead and turn this off right now if you don't. But if you do,
if you want to know, turn this off if you don't.
Exactly. You listen to the first 50 minutes of this show, you're fine. But here's your big spoiler, folks. In the comic book, Andy is still immortal at the end of that comic book. In the movie, she is not. She has her moment where she's taken one shot too many and she gets a stab wound and it doesn't heal. She gets shot in the gut. It doesn't heal. I think this is the moment that Chad's saying when the movie kind of pivoted and there are now stakes involved. And it is a massive difference between the book and the movie. And I think it really diverges these two interpretations of this one story. And we're going to start with Chad, since he originally brought it up earlier in the show. Chad, your thoughts on that? Did you like one or the other?
For me, as far as the story goes, I preferred the one where things might matter now. Because I'm not a torture porn guy. don't get off on, overly violent movies. And so watching people get shot in the head all the time, like, all right, that's cool. Let's do something else is usually how I roll. But yeah, as far as actually like, hey, this might matter for one of these characters, that's a big deal for me. Because when we watched Bloodshot, it was another like, oh, they're cool special effects, but none of this matters. The guy's just going to nanite back together. Who cares?
Yeah.
And Ethan was alluding to this earlier. Is it even heroic at that point? The choices that you're making, like, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to fight these people. Is it that big of a deal? You can do whatever you want. Like, sure, it's nice. It's like picking up garbage on the side of the road. Like, you're helping out. You're doing your part. But, like, it doesn't affect you in any major way. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go get shot up by these people. That's just Wednesday. It's not any grand sacrifice. So when she gets stabbed and it doesn't heal, and they also had that really cool scene that I thought was really powerful when she meets that lady who sews her up or doesn't sew her up, gives her the butterfly stitches. And she's like, you didn't even ask me why. And she's like, you don't need to tell me why.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
You don't get those kind of scenes in the comic book. And I'm going to say that to Ethan's point, in the comic book, after a while, like you had like these really super powerful immortal people, and they were like, yeah, you came after us, and now it's revenge time, and we're just going to come and get you.
Well, they do mention that they can die in the comic book, but it was kind of glossed over early, and then, like you said, once they're kind of in this fight, like it's not really brought to any prominence with Andy specifically in having this, wound or whatever.
Right. But in the comic book, it's just like, yeah, we can't die. We know we can't die. We're probably not going to die. Like, yeah, there's a possibility, but yeah, we're not going to. The story's not going to let this happen. We're going to just go. And it becomes like a revenge fantasy at that point. They were just like, yeah, you captured some of our folks. Don't screw with us or we'll come in and just like murder your entire compound.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind that they're also trying to protect their identities because, there's only 5 of them.
So, yeah, I just thought that it made everybody more human just knowing that Andy could die in the movie.
Yeah. By the way, she still did survive those wounds, though.
I think the movie not only portrays Andy being, obviously getting wounds that won't heal, I think they did a better job of portraying pain than the book ever did. Because, like you said, Andy, that these characters still feel pain. So they still feel being drowned over and over and over again. They still feel being burned alive. The book doesn't really capture that same sentimentality. It just kind of like...
The one moment that I can remember in the book versus the movie is the opening scene where they go to Sudan, right? And they go in the basement. In the movie, they get shot like 1,000 times and they lie on the ground dead for like a few moments at least. In the comic book, they're getting shot and regenerating at the same time. Mm-hmm. They're like, boom, here goes half my brain. Oh, it's just
look how badass I am.
Forward. Like that matters. That matters just them lying on the ground for a little while. It shows a little bit more vulnerability than just boom, I got half my face blown off, I'm still walking forward.
And I also like how the movie did capture a lot of the great scenes in the book. I brought up the fact of the speech was basically verbatim, but also that fall from the skyscraper where it was in the comic book, it was just, Andy and Niall just jumping off and being like, what the hell? Let's try this. Let's see what happens. And then in the movie, it was probably the most badass part of the movie where Niall blocks all the bullets and then just grabs the guy, puts the axe into him, and then just chucks him off, and then they fall 30 stories and crashing into a car. Like, that's much more effective way of doing the same scene.
Okay.
And then her hand at the end.
Yeah.
Her hand reforming.
I did want to ask you guys real quick this one question about the comic book. Do you feel this comic book moves the needle at all? I just feel like if you saw this at a comic book store, I don't think there's anything that jumps out about it. And I don't think that anything really in it moves the genre forward, if that's fair to say. I mean, that might be ultra critical, but...
I think that if there was one thing that I could say the book does well is it provides you with a very solid gay relationship. Like both the movie and the comic book, I think more than anything, it shows a respectful gay relationship, and that's important. So for the needle being moved in that, I'll go with it, because that's a needle that needs to be moved, and this was they do it in a very respectful way, and I give them kudos at least for that.
I was going to say, and Rukka is known for that kind of stuff. He was the creator of Batwoman, who is another, gay character. Mm-hmm. So representation is big for him. What I will say this book accomplished was it got a Netflix show.
It is effective R&D for sure.
Yeah, and unfortunately, take as many shots at Marvel and DC as you want, but a lot of the independent books that come out are just that. They're those movie prospects. They're those R&D scripts and like, hey, somebody turn this into a movie. And they did. And I think the director did a great job mining the best parts of the comic for the movie and then expanding on it. But I'm with you, Ethan, where for one, this isn't my style of story, if I haven't made that clear. Like, I don't like the Punisher. As far as just like telling an action story, it was fine. It did what it set out to do, and it got a Netflix movie made, and I'm sure Greg Rukka has got a pretty nice check for being executive producer and creator and all that, so good on him. All right,
so real quickly, let's go ahead and get our grades on both the movie and the comic book, which one you like more and whatever. And we'll start with Chad, because I think he had some final thoughts he wanted to wrap up with anyways.
I do. I have one question here at the end, but starting off with all the stuff, I know I've come down on this a little bit, but this movie, it fits for a lot of different groups of people, that might not be me, but that's not a dig against that. I think this movie is good. If you're an action movie fan, like you just miss the days of, people going into rooms with machine guns and like this movie does that a lot. Mm-hmm. And also it mixes in some character moments too that you don't traditionally get in the action movies, so it's something different for the genre. Yeah, that was good. I think if you're a Charlize Theron fan, she does a killer job in here. And if you're not somebody that's versed in all the Highlanders or those stories about immortals and immortality and exploring those ideas, like everybody has a first time for something. This movie does a fine job exploring those themes. When I saw it, I'm like, okay, I've seen it before, but if you haven't, you might really dig it. And then ultimately, I think it's good for people that want to celebrate other people getting opportunities. I can't stress that enough. And plus, it's on Netflix, so the investment is very little.
True.
You watch this and you're 20 minutes in, and you're like, this isn't my thing. Guess what? There's a million other things on Netflix you can switch to. No harm, no foul.
Right. And I think you're also great on a curve when you're watching Netflix movies. Like typically movies that you wouldn't have anything to do with, like that The Other Missy. We watched that.
I like that one.
Yeah, I like that too. But I was like, I would never watch this on DVD or in the theater at all.
I would, but I watch a lot of bad movies.
All right, so Chad, your grades.
So I'll grade the movie with a C, just because I think it's your standard action fare. I made the backhanded compliment, like, I'm so happy that we can have these people making so-so movies that, aren't just old white men. And so it's a so-so movie. I'll give the comic a lesser C because I think it was a fine comic. I think it was well done. I think it got him a Netflix movie.
Okay. Not as like a C- or anything, or no?
I can't take too many digs at it.
Like a 77% compared to a 74%.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I think they're both in that C territory. If you told me you loved it, I wouldn't be shocked or like, I can't believe that. But yeah, it is what it is. The movie is where it belongs on Netflix.
All right, Nicole, your grades and final thoughts.
So I am going to recant my words from earlier and say that I liked the movie better in this case. And I think it's come across why. The plot's a little weak in terms of the, bad guys and whatnot, but it was an entertaining hour and a half or whatever. I mean, I think I wouldn't say I wasted my time watching it. And I think, again, what we've pointed out is that the relationships that they've showed and some of the character people I really liked in the movie a lot more than in the comic itself. I don't know, maybe it's kind of my struggle with comics still, to absorb all that's in the pictures in the comics. I think I tend to focus more on the word bubbles, and if it's too crowded, maybe I'm missing on some of the artistic stuff. So maybe that's, a flaw in my reading style, especially being newer to comics. But I think we pointed out the things that I really liked more about the movie, the different relationships and the focuses and things like that. The one thing I was going to mention too is it was ironic that we then turned on Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade like a couple days later after watching this, and so it kind of really ties together like this quest for immortality versus like dealing with immortality if it's kind of just handed to you, or when you're not seeking it. Like it just kind of made me think of people don't want to die, but then like when people are actually blessed / cursed with that, then the exhaustion of it.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I will give the movie a solid B. Again, the plot's not like the best. And then I'd give the book a C because I just really didn't get as much out of it.
All right, Ethan.
One thing that I did want to just say about, I think, both the comic and the movie property, I think they are both projects of the 90s that were somehow transported over into early 2020s, the late teens. I just got this really 90s vibe from both things. I think the 90s dealt with a lot of stories that dealt with immortality for some reason. So I got that vibe from it. I don't know. And again, like, I think that the median age probably of people that watch this movie are probably like 42 to 43, which I don't think does the movie very many favors, because obviously you want to get younger people to not only watch movies but also read comic books. And I just don't think that there was anything in this comic book that didn't speak to people that already would be wanting to read comic books in the first place.
Are you saying because it stars 6,000-year-old characters that the youngsters aren't going to be hip? What's going on?
No, I'm just saying that I think that just the style of the genre, and I don't think that, now that I look at it back, because I was going to grade the book fairly highly at first glance, but I tend to grade non-capes books on a curve anyways, just because I like to see what the genre can do outside of capes. But I think that you guys have brought in significant qualms about the book that I can't give it anything higher than a C+. And so that's what I think that I'm going to ultimately lie both the movie and the book as a C+. I think it was a solid movie. I think it was a solid book. I think I was glad that I invested the time that I did into it, but I don't expect to revisit any of these characters. Like, if Netflix made a show about this, I'm not going to watch it. I was glad that
they made a sequel movie.
They're going to, because that's why they made the second book. That's what I'm talking about. They said the same thing with the Umbrella Academy. They needed more
Netflix
content.
drives me insane because they have these previews that are good, and then you look at it's 12 episodes of something. I'm like, I just want to get a concise movie from you, Netflix. I don't want to watch.
I'm glad it was a movie, not a series.
Yeah.
Did you guys stick around for the after credit scene?
Yeah,
I did.
Yeah, we did.
The obligatory comic
Setting
book
up the
movie
sequel.
after credits.
Right. Yep.
But I hope it's a movie sequel. That's my point. I don't think that this is a strong enough story to have a series.
Right.
Yeah,
I think it works well as a movie.
And I think I'm going to jump in with my grade and my final thoughts on this, because, again, I agree. This was the reason why we did this on this show, is because it was a movie and it wasn't a TV show. Because nobody is going to sit through 12, 13 episodes. Nobody's going to do it and want to review that, the next week. You get a 2-hour movie, you're going to do that. You're going to be like, okay, it's fine. I'll watch it. I'm done, and I'm out. When it came to the movie and the comic book, what I said was, I think that the best interpretation of this particular story is probably somewhere in the middle, because I think that there were aspects of the book that were good that were left out of the movie, and then there were aspects of the movie that were good that weren't in the book. Like, for example, I like really the story of Andy and her love affair with that Achilles guy. I thought that was really good. I mean, I think you see a painting or something in one of the scenes, but pages about showing, her not aging and him aging, and eventually him having basically begging her to leave so that people wouldn't get suspicious. That's powerful. And, it's one of those things. You brought it up with the curse of immortality. I think that everybody kind of equates in terms of fiction and immortality is this notion that, like, death is the same as sleep. Like, we can understand sleep, right? We all go to sleep and then we wake up. But we know that our body eventually gets tired. Like we're like, I'm tired. I just want to go to sleep for a little while. I just want to rest. That's why people sometimes say like, he's resting now, or she's resting now. It's this notion that like, if you're immortal, you never get to rest. You never get to have peace. Things just keep going and going and going. And as human beings, we're not used to that. Even though we want that. We also understand the notion that we eventually want to rest. So maybe I went down a rabbit hole with that. But long story short, I think the movie did the story slightly better. I liked, again, Nyla's character more. I liked the fact that Andy had stakes. I liked the fact that it wasn't just like, a bunch of mortals just come in and just beat the crap out of some guy that stole a couple of their folks. So I'm going to give the movie, I'm probably a B-. I think it was enjoyable, and I probably would watch the sequel because, again, it would just be 2 hours, and I'd just be like, okay, whatever. I got some time. I don't know if I'd read the second book. I think the book is probably like a C to maybe a C-, and it's just because, boy, with that book, it had nice art. It had some decent characterization in terms of the gay couple, but ultimately I was just like, I've read so many comics like this. Like, I'm glad that Greg Rukka got his paycheck for writing the same story that like 4 other people wrote before him. I hate to say it like that, and I hate to be harsh, but that's the truth. But there are better immortal stories out there in comic books, is what I'm saying. So.
All right, so that was our review of Old Guard. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And we hope you enjoy the last Comic Shop podcast and you come back again. Since Andrew's not here, I think we can skip the dad joke, though. And we'll just... but we do want you to come back next week when we'll be reviewing Red Sun by Mark Millar in honor of the new Superman movie that hopefully everyone will be checking out this week. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe.
And after you have rated and subscribed and all that other fun stuff, make sure you go out and support your local comic shop. We don't have any recommendations this week other than just to tune in next week and see what we come up with for that Superman movie. But you can always find out what we're doing and what we're up to on the socials. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Threads. Sometimes we're on Instagram. You can find links to all that stuff and more at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, where they can find what else, J.A.?
You can find links to our merch store where we always sell t-shirts, coffee mugs, hats, tote bags. This week only, special shirts that can take bullets and don't get like blown away and ripped away. That's the one thing about that Old Guard movie. They get shot all the time, but their clothing is always just perfectly intact. I never got that.
Well, it has to perfectly show off Charlize Theron. And if you're looking for anything else, you can go to BCW Supplies, get all your comic book nerdy stuff, including long boxes and the sheet thingamajiggers that go around your comics and all that good stuff. And if you want to be extra special and get a little discount for yourself, you can use the promo code LCSPOD and support the show.
That's right, and get 10% off your bill for your troubles. So until next week, it's the Last Comic Shop podcast, and we don't have
a dad joke. Woohoo!
Yeah. Or an ending.
And what do we say? Stay safe.
Yeah, just pull the plug. Just pull it.
Just say goodbye.
Goodbye!
Comic Shop Podcast was a 2025 Black Angus production.